once I see that live thing, then we can start the show. There it is. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode 276. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, I got a full crew. I have got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing all right. Welcome to the revolution, everybody. Exciting times.
It will be televised. It will be live streamed. Isaac Orr, research fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. How are you, good sir?
Pretty good, homies. How are you?
You ever going to put a TV on that little mount back there?
No, why would I?
All right. And also joining us, we have Cameron Sholty. He is the Director of Government Relations here at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me again.
Wow, Justin, how'd you get so much more handsome?
I appreciate that, Isaac. Appreciate that.
Justin was kicked off the show.
Well, not only that, but we made an executive decision to fire the executive editor. So Justin Haskins will no longer be affiliated with the Heartland Institute. He's far too controversial. His stance is on whaling, really out there, and not compatible with the vision of the organization. So don't let the door hit you on the way out. Justin T. Haskins, Mr. Blue Checkmark Socialist.
Thank you for getting that all off your chest. In reality,
like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders.
Yeah, despite what Isaac said, in reality, Justin was caught bringing out the Senate podium from the Capitol building yesterday, and we just couldn't have that flack on this podcast, so he's off. He's off.
I thought you were going to say he was caught with wearing horns, standing at the speaker's podium with red, white, and blue face paint.
Not mutually exclusive. I think those are both them.
No, that was Noder.
Oh, yeah.
John was there cleaning up the mess. Let's be real.
That's a good point. A couple of windows broken, though, so I don't know how that Windex works on that.
He's got the special formula that repairs the glass.
So it's 2021, which means 2020 is over, so everything should go back to normal. Oh, shoot. We start off with a siege on the Capitol building in the early days of 2021, so I don't know if that's going to be a bellwether of what this year holds for us, but I guess we'll see. I don't know. But before we talk about that, because I feel like we're obligated to talk about that, it seems like it's kind of the biggest news of the week, obviously. But I also do want to talk about just looking forward into 2021 and what we should expect from a policy perspective. Looking forward, what are going to be the biggest policy things, whether it's state or national, that we should be looking out for in this coming year, especially with an incoming Biden administration. Hopefully that doesn't upset too many people hearing that, but it's reality, so we got to just deal with it. Before we talk about that stuff, like I said, we kind of have to talk about this siege on the Capitol building, hashtag invasion. I don't know. How are they painting it on the news, Jim?
They're painting it on the news as a siege on the Capitol, as a grave threat to democracy, and everybody should be upset. Look, this is not good. It's insane. It's crazy. That kind of thing shouldn't happen in America, especially people on the right, believe in our, in the Constitution and believe in respecting norms and all of that. But, as this was unfolding yesterday,
Jim. Put a period.
It's outrageous. It should never have happened. All those people that burst into the Capitol were trespassing, and all those who assaulted the police should be arrested, and they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. It's an outrage. And here's your but, Isaac. And it's but yesterday, as I was working and I was told about all this, because I don't have television here in the office, I was told about all this by you, Donnie, and some of our friends on a group text saying, hey, are you seeing what's going on? It's insane what's going on out there right now. And I'm sorry, I had a real hard time getting morally outraged over the violence in the streets, the protests, the storming of the Capitol. I really had a hard time gathering the energy to mentally stand up in the middle of the road, waving my hands, yelling, stop. Not after what we've seen all through the year of 2020, not when, rioting in the streets with the BLM protests and the Antifa people coming in and cities burning night after night after night, and the media celebrating them, literally CNN reporters standing in front of a burning building saying that this protest is mostly peaceful. when you encourage political violence, when you excuse it, and AOC had tweeted things saying that violence is necessary for social change and all of these things, you can't start a play revolution. People out there cosplaying that they're going to overturn, they're going to get Trump out of there no matter what. You can't let people play at revolution and think only one side gets to play. You know, the radicals on the right were there yesterday, and there were some Antifa there, by the way, proven through photographs and other sleuthing online. But, you know, not everybody who stormed into the Capitol was a Trump supporter. There were Antifa people there as well, and some argue that they're the ones who started it, and they're the ones who started all those BLM riots as well. It just takes a few, and then the momentum of the crowd and the madness of the crowd takes over. It's a long practiced tactic by revolutionaries. But putting that aside, you can't excuse and downplay and almost celebrate in some ways the violence. The people died. People were shot, killed. A Trump supporter in Portland, Oregon, I believe, was just shot, murdered in cold blood on the street. People, I think Andy, you might have told me this. 33 people have died, or so far. You know, if you include all of the unrest that has happened in this country. But you can't downplay or even encourage this kind of revolution and expect it to only apply to one side. What we're going to find is that the people that, because these morons, they live stream themselves and take selfies with cops while they're invading the Capitol building, they're going to be identified, they're going to be arrested, and they're going to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. That is a very good thing. But I'm sorry, I had a really hard time, and even today have a hard time being morally outraged over this and holding up my hands yelling, stop, we can't do this. We have been doing this for almost an entire year, and our political elites and our cultural elites have either encouraged it or turned a blind eye to it and excused it in some way. So, I'm sorry, this should never happen, but this did not start yesterday. This has been going on for months, and it's been encouraged and allowed to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a double standard. I think that anybody can see that. Like you said, the protests over the course of the summer, which, 30 plus people died, $1 billion in property damage, literally cities burning, looting of all of that stuff, right? And it's just like, it was like, oh, no, this is just the language of the unheard, right? That's right. Fine. That's okay. And then we turn to what happened yesterday, which was shocking. I will say that. I was literally shocked while watching this. And it's just like that's being painted as like the apocalypse. So I think there's definitely a double standard, but there's one thing that you had mentioned, the idea of kind of mustering up like moral outrage. And I want to bring Isaac into this because there was an episode a little while ago where Justin was a part of this, or who shall not be named anymore, where we talked about kind of the morality of protesting. So Isaac, I mean, do you think that this was a moral protest?
Oh man, that's different than I thought you were going to ask. No, because
hard-hitting questions here.
It kind of was though, right? Because it was so open-ended. Like, what is a moral protest, and like, I think everybody has a different threshold of what they think like a moral protest is, and then like people have their different point at which they're willing to say, okay, well, the violence that's associated with this cause is worth it, because like. That's exactly what happened in Minneapolis this last summer, and I had a front row seat to that. So, people there were saying, oh, well, yeah, there's violence is happening, but this is worth it, right? Like the violence now happening is worth it. And it's really difficult to say, like, yes, some violence is worth it and some violence isn't. And, I selfishly loved watching the Yellow Vest riots that were happening in France. I was on the record on this show, like excited about it. But when you see what happens as a result of that, like, I do think that we need to extend the same amount of moral outrage to when our side does it as well. If, like one of the reasons that this escalated is because the other side was just like, oh, well, it's our people. We'll downplay it. And one of the first things that I thought when, the helicopters were flying over my house in Minneapolis last summer was, a few months earlier, there had been a protest at the state capitol about the COVID shutdown that the governor had implemented. And the only thing that protest was met with was derision. And you just want to kill grandma. Look at all these rubes. And then like the George Floyd incident happens, and like they're burning down affordable housing developments. The grocery store I used to go to, they looted Target, and Keith Ellison comes out. And as you said earlier, well, this is the language of the unheard. A riot is the language of the unheard. So I don't know. We all just need to be consistent in this. And,
well, I mean, isn't that the biggest difference though, with like these protests that we were, like on the show constantly talking bad about, which was like going through streets and accosting private citizens and private businesses, versus this, which was a public building. It was occupying a public building. So I don't know, Cameron, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm gonna part ways with Jim, which isn't to say I don't agree with him, but I am absolutely indignant about yesterday's protests at the Capitol, because I don't see it as protest. I see it as a rebellion. It was the disruption with the stated purpose of stopping a constitutionally and statutorily prescribed action of the United States Congress. That's what it was. Let's not pretend it was anything but. And we can lament that or be frustrated. Oh, there were Antifa protesters in there. I don't care if there were Antifa protesters in the crowd. Trump supporters have agency. They don't have to follow along with it. I don't let my children follow along with bad behavior. Why am I going to accept it from my side as well?
Care to respond, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not accepting it, and I think maybe you even said, or Isaac said, that they understand it. Certainly there were lots of Trump people. The poor woman who got shot trying to enter the speaker's what they call the speaker's lobby, right outside the very House chambers. She was shot in the neck by apparently by part of Mike Pence's security detail as she asked for a boost so that she could climb through a broken window and get into the House of Representatives. She was a Trump supporter. She was a rabid Trump supporter. There's a video going around of her ranting, against the system. And so, none of that should happen. I'm not excusing any of that. And I think that's nuts. That's radical. And certainly, your point, Cameron, about this is the constitutionally prescribed way we change power in this country, and they were trying to interrupt the Congress doing that. I'm 100% totally against that. My only point being is that you can't encourage the quote unquote voice of the unheard, and when there's other people out there who think they're not being heard, who think that the election is stolen. 70% of partisan Republicans believe that this election was at least fishy, if not outright stolen from their preferred president. Now, back in 2016, I think it was like 68% of Democrats thought that the Russians altered vote tallies. So, there's lots of radicalism and crazy ideas to go around, but you can't crack down on this, or you can't be morally outraged about this and not morally outraged about the other. I'm exhausted. My moral outrage meter is pegged. It's broken. I can't do it anymore.
I mean, you're clearly outraged.
Now,
there's outrage in your voice, right? So you are upset about something.
Yes, I'm upset that our political elites and our culture, excused and allowed this kind of political violence to go on for a year. And you add on to that, Isaac, good point about the lockdowns. They were building this was a pressure cooker that just kept getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And, every attempt to try to tone it down was poo-pooed. It's like you're trying to suppress somebody's voice. People sitting on, all summer long, this was going on. People just trying to sit outside in Washington, D.C. and have dinner are accosted by radical leftists, and they're celebrated. They claps from the leftists that are in our Congress. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm sick of it. I can't get upset that people stormed the Capitol after putting up with all that other stuff all summer and fall long. I mean, I'm sorry. It's hard for me to I condemn it. It's contemptible.
But you can't.
Should never have happened. But you can understand that you can't light the fuse of revolution and expect only one side and your side to get out there in the streets and start cracking skulls. That when you set the stage for this sort of thing and then it happens, don't cry that it's happening. You should have expected this. You can't lock people up in their homes for 8 months. You can't tell people they have to wear masks everywhere they go, and they can't go to the gym. They can't go. Their businesses are closed. Walmart is open, but a store down the street is closed that has been owned by my neighbor as a shopkeeper for 2 generations. That is closed, but Walmart is open. You can't have all of this building up and expect nothing to explode.
Yesterday, but none of those things are related to yesterday, right? Like,
no, I think it's all related. I think all of that is part of the frustration.
I think that the frustration is, but like the appropriate outlet is not to storm the Capitol building and
of course not
all that other stuff. So, like, I agree that when all the rioting was happening in Minneapolis, my thought was, well, you know what those people who were at the Capitol and protesting against the lockdowns are going to think. The logical conclusion to take away from all of this is, well, I guess we weren't violent enough. So I'm totally on board with you saying that if one side does it, the other side's going to feel like they get to do it too, which is why
it's learned behavior.
Yeah, exactly. It's monkey see, monkey do. It's the most, classic human way of acting. So
especially, it's learned behavior, especially when you add to that leftist prosecutors in your state, I know, Isaac, and others are not prosecuting these rioters all summer long. They let them out. They let them out of jail, and they're not going to prosecute. Kamala Harris herself even promoted a bail fund for the people that turned our cities upside down and set them on fire.
Well, clearly these people thought that they were going to be above the law too, right? Because otherwise they wouldn't have done this. I don't know if any of the people that stormed the Capitol thought, I'm going to do this, but I'm also going to have to pay the consequences of it. Like,
I hope they do.
Well, I do too, right? But like, I think that they probably thought, oh, well, President Trump said we should, storm the institutions or whatever. Like, I'm not exactly sure what.
I'm going to part ways with you guys and say, I actually want to see the full. I want to see these people punished such that no one in America ever again thinks about trespassing against a constitutionally prescribed action by the U.S. Congress. There isn't wiggle room in my mind here. This was an abhorrent action, and it should be prosecuted far more seriously than what we saw over the summer, because in my mind, our conservatives need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We can't dismiss our side because the other side did it. Because a fuse was lit by the other side is not an excuse for us to behave abhorrently. We must hold ourselves to a higher standard.
No. Here's my proposal. We hold each other to equal standards. Now, I believe that everybody who stormed the Capitol should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. They should be charged with every crime they can be charged with, and they should actually go through, and they should serve jail time if found guilty. And the same should happen to all the people, and they're all on freaking videotape, that burned up our cities all summer. But that's not going to happen, Cameron. There is going to be one standard applied to the people who rioted yesterday, who took part in a peaceful protest that maybe got a little out of hand because civil unrest and uprising is great.
Jim,
those people are going to be nailed. Those people are going to be nailed to the wall.
Jim.
Those people are going to be nailed to the wall as they should be. But all the people that burned our cities all summer, for the most part, are all getting off scot-free. So I propose we have rules that are equal for everybody. But we don't live in a country like that right now. And that is part of what added to the pressure in this pressure cooker that we live in right now called the United States.
Yeah. Okay. So 2 things. One is I think that it was a mostly peaceful tour of the Capitol building. So that's what I'm labeling it. And to your pressure cooker analogy, I do think that that's a big part of all of this. Maybe it's not like a directly referenced thing in this kind of siege of the Capitol building. But I think that the idea of just shutting down the economy, penning people up in their homes for months and months and months on end, limiting their income, closing down their businesses, all of that stuff, exacerbated the riots that happened over the summer and also exacerbated this as well. I think that you can't just lock people up and assume that it's not going to have some type of consequence in one way or another. So I definitely think that there's a pressure cooker thing going on with all of this.
It's funny you mentioned, if you remember, it was years ago, but Baltimore had riots. I'd even forget. Oh, it was another police incident. Gray was the guy's name, Gray, I think. Anyway, the mayor of Baltimore said that she wanted to give people the space to riot,
right?
Because they needed to get it out, right?
And
I would rather for a long time.
And I'd rather them take it out on public buildings than private businesses. Let's just
that's one way to look at it. I mean, look, government buildings in Portland have been under siege several times, and apparently that was okay. In fact, you might remember
that wasn't okay.
No, it's not okay. No, it's not okay. I don't think any of this is okay. But some people think it's righteous and wonderful that they do these things. And those are the people that really control our media and culture in this country. But Cameron, you remember, and Isaac, you do too, because you both live up there in Wisconsin / Minnesota. It's all the same to me here in Illinois. I don't care. But the state
I think you live in a toilet. So there.
Right. Okay. Well, you're not wrong. The state capital of Madison, of course, Madison, Wisconsin, was under siege for what was it, Isaac?
I was in the Capitol.
Would know this.
When that happened.
That's right. You guys were both in the Capitol.
I was there too.
Yeah,
it was a mostly peaceful. The most violent thing was the smells that accumulated over weeks of unwashed hippie.
The hallway I worked in was the hallway I worked in was the food court.
God.
Yeah, I worked for Frank Lassay there. So
wait, explain to me what happened, because I don't know what you're talking about.
In 2000, Jesus, Donnie.
2011, Scott Walker got elected.
2011, Scott Walker proposed what would
I was serving tables in 2011, so go ahead. Sorry.
He proposed what would become Act 10, a collective bargaining reform legislation and budget fix. It effectively neutered public employee unions in Wisconsin, teachers, state employees, etc. And it wasn't outrageous. It wasn't like we were trying to we were trying to decertify the unions. That was the genius of it. But
11 years later, 10 years later, cat's out of the bag. Cameron Sholty exposing state secrets.
We were asking teachers and state employees to contribute more to their pension and health care.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
because
that made people upset. And then
as an addendum, we said, hey, and we're going to change some of the union certification rules.
Okay.
Protesters from the university, UW-Madison, stormed the Capitol, and
not just them. Like, they bust people in from all over. Like,
I mean, it was a circus.
SEIU, all of these things
around the Capitol Square. There was a camel walking around the Capitol Square,
and they took physical control of the state capitol for how many days?
Oh man, it was a month, wasn't it, Cameron? Like,
I think those ding dongs are still singing every afternoon.
Yeah, so they had this group called the Capitol Singers who would come in and sing. And like at first they just sang because they lived in the Capitol rent free. That was my biggest thing as a landlord. I find that offensive. They weren't charging them rent, but they would sing every day at the lunch hour, and then they'd come in and they'd sing all of their "We Shall Not Be Moved" songs. And what was they made all of these classic songs into pro-union songs. It was really funny. I forget the one.
So interrupting the proper governmental business of the state of Wisconsin, was another, I guess, attack on the government because they were protesting what the government was doing.
I don't know if they
a little bit like
anything,
what happened yesterday.
Well,
I do know this. I actually talked to Scott Walker. We had him at a Heartland event. I don't know, 6 months after that, and we had a chance to chat. And he told me some pretty harrowing stories. And I know that there are other politicians who literally had to sneak out of windows and run away, lest they be at risk of being beaten to death by the radical leftists that have been bussed in to physically take over the Capitol. Now, I'm not bringing this up to say it's all the same thing, but I'm saying these things have happened before, Cameron, and these are all attacks on the government system. And so, again, to act like yesterday was some kind of anomaly, like this has never happened before, is not true.
Well, no, I agree with you, Jim. I'm not saying that your concerns aren't legitimate. My point is, I wish we cannot excuse our behavior because the other side does it.
No excuses.
I agree with that. Sure, I agree with that 100%.
No excuses. No, I mean, just the whole attitude. I'm sorry, by the media that this is some kind of aberration, like this has never happened before. It happens all the time during the Kavanaugh hearings. Protesters took up almost the entirety of the public space in one of the Senate office buildings, and they put it on Twitter with big thumbs up all over the place, like it's some sort of great thing. I think the Trump people probably just kind of wanted to do something like that, and it got way out of hand with a lot of violence. And yes, these people trespassed, these people destroyed property, these people assaulted people. There were scraps with the cops. I mean, that should all be prosecuted. And I think one of the things to wonder about here is that we have the most lavishly funded government in the history of civilization. And, a few hundred people can just storm the castle. Like, how is this possible? And I'll tell you how it's possible. Actually, I worked in the Capitol building shortly after 9/11. I started working with the Washington Times, and they had all this new security up in there. And then at the time, I think it was around 2002 or 2003, there was this concern about ricin, that it was like, ricin gas. You could just release it, and you could carry out a terrorist attack. Even right after 9/11, when we were very, very mindful about security, I was actually even then kind of shocked how easy it would be for somebody to get in and do something very, very awful with ricin or anything else. I mean, it's just so easy. So, when people were expressing shock that it was that easy for people to storm the Capitol building, it's like, if you spend any time there, it's actually not that shocking at all. There should have been more police there, but it could have happened.
Yeah. Security is going to be a mess.
Oh, I know.
Unless anyone's got any last things to say on this topic, we should probably move on. I'm sure that we've pissed off everybody on every side of the aisle on our takes on this, so we probably did a good enough job. Anyone want to put any last little bow on this? I mean, I think that we can take solace in the fact that this doesn't seem like it's going to be a month-long thing. I think it's over, unless I'm mistaken. Maybe I haven't been watching the news or anything like that. So, anyone want to say anything? Hearing nothing, let's move on. All right, so 2021 is in full effect. We will see. We'll see what happens. But one thing that I think is clear is that we will have a Biden administration. We have new kind of political landscape across a number of states, and I want to just talk about, because we're a policy-based podcast, I want to talk about some of the public policy that's going to be kind of front and center in the next 12 months or so. So maybe there's some prediction time. Maybe there's just some stuff that we should put a focus on as a free market organization. So I want to kind of talk about those things. But the most important one, in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is the potential of a Biden administration declaring a climate emergency, and kind of what the implications of that would be, the potential and the implications of what would happen if that were to occur. So I've got a couple of articles here. And this is kind of like on the heels of just like them declaring a state of emergency in regards to COVID and all the stuff that we've seen different state houses do, or even at a federal level do, because of this declaration, because of the COVID emergency, right? Cameron could probably speak to that, with the Governors Not Gods thing that we've got going on in GR. But I just want to start off talking about this potential for a climate emergency. So I've got an article here. This is a Fox Business article, and it starts off saying a host of environmental groups is urging President-elect Joe Biden to declare a national climate emergency, a move that would grant him greater power to address the issue and fulfill his pledge to ban new fossil fuel leases on public land. On Tuesday, a letter signed by 538 organizations offered Biden a draft executive order he could purportedly use on his first day to ban new fossil fuel leases. Yada, 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 existential crisis. But then it goes into like some of the things that this declaration could mean. So one of the things here, and I've got another thing that kind of goes into some of this, but it says that the transportation secretary could have the power to restrict automobile and truck use to decrease emissions, while the president's international emergency authority could allow him to regulate financial activity involving entities trafficking in fossil fuels. It also talks about the idea of being able to kind of shut down new gas and oil on federal lands, as well as a number of other things. I've got another article here. This is from the New Republic, and it's titled Why Biden Should Declare a Climate Emergency. And they go into a little bit more detail into what kind of powers that this would grant them. So it says, once the act is invoked, the Biden administration should use those powers ambitiously. It says here that that he could use this to lift the 40-year. Let's see here. He could. Okay, here we go. President Biden could direct the Department of Defense to construct clean energy systems through the emergency redirection of a portion of military funds. The rest of the government could follow suit, deploying rooftop solar systems and clean energy technologies on government buildings. Along with this emergency declaration, Biden should invoke a Defense Production Act, which, through the act's allocation, finance, and industry coordination powers, he can mobilize domestic production of solar panels, smart grid infrastructure, a whole bunch of other things. One is talking about how they could basically allow guaranteed and interest-free loans to organizations or industries to build things that we need to become carbon neutral, like a whole host of different things. If he just goes out and declares this climate emergency. So, Jim, I guess the first question is this likely to occur? It seems like a big step. It seems like it gives everybody on the, climate alarmist side of the aisle everything on their wish list. So is this something that we should expect, or am I just kind of crying wolf here?
I expect the worst case scenario in every situation. So yes, I expect this to happen. I do find it hilarious that Joe Biden is being urged to use emergency powers to redirect Defense Department funds to build or install solar panels and do other green projects. But Donald Trump was a tyrant and a threat to the Constitution when he wanted to do the very same thing, but to build a wall on the southern border. So it used to not be something you can do, but now it's something you can do for the climate. That's awesome. But I think it's 100%, what's 100% certainty? I'm 100% certain that Joe Biden will declare a climate emergency and then just start by fiat doing whatever he wishes. The good news is, if there's any good news on this, of what Trump is doing on his way out of office, aside from the very not so great things he's doing and saying on his way out of office, he opened up, they are now, ANWR, the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge, is now open for oil drilling, and leases are being put out for bid. So that's actually going to happen. It's going to be harder, I think, for Biden to stop that. But yeah, we're going to see a so-called climate emergency, and we're going to see all sorts of very quick, quote unquote, action to stop climate change, which is not possible.
Isaac Orr, I mean, you're probably the most energy-focused guy on the podcast here. Is this something to expect? And do you think that, like, if it were declared, that you would see actions like the ones I was just describing?
So I could see them doing some of this stuff for sure. So I took a look at what the actual executive order they are pushing would be. And the big things were stopping drilling on federal land and stopping crude oil exports for a year. I think that they could do that. Also stopping natural gas exports. So I think that the powers that they would have under this climate emergency would be more limited than what this document is asking for. Most of what this document is doing could already be achieved through the executive action, but that would require like a rule-making process, and it wouldn't be immediate. So some of the things that are in here include like a beefed up endangerment finding, basically, which would probably result in even less realistic social cost of carbon. So there was one that said promulgate regulations pursuant to the Clean Air Act for all stationary sources of greenhouse gases. So basically the things that are climate emergencies, like the Defense Production Act, those are potentially ways that they could get around a lack of funding for some of this stuff. So I think that they could probably do some of this. Yeah.
I mean, Cameron, is it an apt analogy for me to make the connection between declaring a climate emergency and be able to do basically whatever they want in terms of government action on trying to combat climate, whatever, and the COVID declaration of emergency?
Well, yeah, the roadmap's there. I mean, right. I mean, we're talking about two completely different entities, right? The federal government is going to be heavy-handed, one size fits all over 50 states. I would imagine much of what an emergency order would govern would be issued by Biden is only going to apply to federal activity. It can only apply to commerce between states. They would not be able to pinpoint regulation inside each and individual states. But clearly, there's a roadmap there. And if we've seen anything over the last now 12 months, if you can package it up and put a bow on it, plenty of people are going to go along with it and say, oh, we had these things taken away from us a year ago. Well, what's a little bit more? And that was always what we wanted to push back at Heartland with our Governors Not Gods program, right? Was that we didn't, it was such a dangerous slippery slope. If it was going to be today public health, which is the easy sale, then everything becomes a public health crisis.
Yep. I mean, the city council of Minneapolis declared racism a public health crisis.
Right. Racism becomes a public health crisis. Guns become a public health crisis. The climate is a public health crisis. Everything now, poor education is a public health crisis. Everything then becomes that. And we now have the model to empower executive branches across 50 states. And this is a bipartisan problem. I would love to sit here and tell you that Republican governors are the only abusers or Democrat governors are the only abusers. This is a bipartisan abuse of freedom.
The reason I'm 100% certain that the declaration will be made and that there will be all sorts of executive actions is because, as Cameron just alluded to, especially over the last year, where have we seen any person who can seize power act as if there's any limiting principle upon their application of that power? From the COVID lockdowns, arbitrarily deciding this, arbitrarily deciding that. That is the template.
We're giving Emmys away. We're giving Emmys away to these guys.
That's right. That's right. And especially on the climate side, Biden's climate staff basically are some of the most radical people you can imagine, and they're going to be pushing hard for these sorts of things. So, to save the planet in a climate emergency, we have to wait for it. Restrict your freedom.
How dare you? How dare you?
The roadmap that's kind of put in place, it's not just a roadmap. It's like a trail blazed right through concrete. And I've said this before. It's just like one of the things that I think limited like the Green New Deal when that plan was being floated around is just the astronomical price tag of that. You just mentioned that it cost upwards of $90 trillion over 10 years. And people are just like, well, that's impossible. And I think COVID, what that did was just like, oh, debt and deficits, that's secondary. Nobody cares about that. So when I see like under the Clean Air Act, Biden EPA can put strict limits on methane, blah, 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 blah. It could also extend critical loan guarantees to clean energy companies, communities, and electric cooperatives for distributed energy systems. It's just like that seems like the biggest, like, just endless amount of treasure trove just poured into these industries that they could possibly imagine. Yeah. You're going to see trillions of dollars. Who cares? It's to save the world from an existential crisis. We got to do it.
The good news is the government can't organize a 2-car parade.
Well, Biden's campaign couldn't. That was
Look at the vaccine rollout.
Come on, Jim.
We're seeing DeSantis down in Florida with the vaccine rollout being efficient, relying on leaning into the private sector to do it. And then you have California and Wisconsin and New York, led by Democrat governors, who have put all sorts of parameters on who and when vaccines can be distributed. I would think, speaking to Isaac's point about the rulemaking process and bumping that up against the experience with the vaccine rollout. Do I think Biden will try? Yes. Do I think it'll be an abject disaster? Yes, I do.
Yes, but that won't stop them from printing trillions upon trillions of dollars. Isaac,
but they don't even have to have good rules to have an effect. Like when you look at the mercury and air toxic standards, when you look at the Clean Power Plan, none of that stuff was going to hold up to court scrutiny, but companies plan around that stuff. So you can have a regulation that's totally BS, but if you can make people fear the compliance with that, you can make them comply with the regulation, even if it gets struck down. That's the problem with having as much executive power as we have, frankly, because it emboldens the swamp to do whatever they want. And they really have no accountability. That's the problem.
You know what? That reminds me of when California changed their emission standards to affect 2 and 4 cycle engines. Brayton Stratton being a big producer of the 2 and 4 cycle engine on lawnmowers, snow blowers, etc., just to comply with California,
Right.
it de facto means it's a nationwide standard.
Right. Right. It says here that he could direct the EPA to set new standards that require 100% electric vehicles for cars and light trucks by 2030. I mean, we've seen this already in California, and to Cameron's point, that would have a cascading effect across the country. But Isaac, do you think that a Biden administration would do something like that?
I mean, it's a lot more likely now that they have the Senate. So all bets are off for the next 2 years, buddies.
Gosh. I'm just going to...
Well, I would just to add a caveat to that, does the union go along with that? Depends what that policy looks like. Because if it means the loss of union jobs in Detroit,
or billions and trillions of dollars into it to make sure
they don't care about the unions anymore. Like,
not the private sector unions, the public sector unions they care about, but not the private sector ones.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Like the union members in Minnesota have kept this state blue forever. Now they turned into some of the most red people. So private sector unions, I think they're totally cool getting away from that voter block and just kind of embracing like the new finance suburban green model. It's been working for them. So I think that's the direction they're headed, but I see the world through this lens. So that's just my perspective.
Well, Isaac, Biden says that all these union members will get all these new green jobs. So, especially auto workers, so, what's the problem? We'll just pay them all off. They'll pay off the unions, or at least enough of them.
Right.
Or you can learn the code.
Endless amounts of money. They just print it off and pour it into these industries. They're not going to lose any jobs. Jim, there's another thing in here, another paragraph in this that might directly apply to you. We'll see. It says, an address to the nation declaring climate change a national emergency would also give Biden an opportunity to do what no U.S. politician had the courage to do before. Put the blame for the existential crisis, existential threat of climate change squarely where it belongs. In what's likely the most destructive disinformation campaign in history, the fossil fuel industry. Despite knowing since 1960s that carbon emissions from its products were likely warming the planet, spread malignant lies downplaying these dangers. I mean, there's a lot of terminology in here that makes me think that you're going to be dragged in front of the firing squads. I mean, courts to explain yourself.
Yeah, I guess the likes of me might end up in climate prison or something like that.
You'll be the first one, too.
You totally will be.
Be first? Oh, that's great.
You'll deserve it.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. So with the Democrats taking over the Senate, Sheldon Whitehouse, who has the hate on for the Heartland Institute obsessively, is going to haul, probably not me, but our president, James Taylor, in front of the committee to explain ourselves. Why are you spreading all this disinformation? That's one of the most hated words of 2020, by the way.
Can they subpoena you for that? Can they make you do that?
I think so.
Congress.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they
Power.
Yep. Congress has subpoena power. So
do they have to pay for your hotel though?
Oh, why not?
I think they should. You shouldn't have to go there on your own dime.
Explain how you have like really restrictive dietary issues. They need to fly in foods like from Tokyo.
That's right. But so we are going to have, there's going to be recriminations for the likes of me and others who are skeptical that humans are causing a climate crisis. We are actually, it's a good time to plug our 14th International Conference on Climate Change, which we are still hosting in Las Vegas, April 16th and 17th. We'll be talking about this and a lot of other issues. But the idea, and this is another dangerous thing that kind of leads into what we were talking about at the top of the show. The idea that if you disagree with the powerful in government, that you need to be threatened, you need to be silenced on social media, you need to be threatened by powerful people in government, and you need to be quote unquote held to account for lying to the people about climate change. It's like, look, the scientists we work with look at the data and say, CO2 does have a warming effect, but it decreases its ability to warm over time. So we're basically kind of saturated. There's not going to be a lot of difference in the increase in temperature at 420 parts per million to 480 parts per million. And talking about that fact that sea level rise has not increased significantly in the last 200 years, that it's a continual slow climb, saying things like that because the data tells you so, is now basically a political crime in this country, and will be by the time the left that's taking over Congress and the administrative state is done with the likes of us.
Jim, I would just like to remind you that we've always been at war with Eurasia.
Okay, well,
you know what? I don't like this Cameron guy. He reads.
Yeah.
I don't know if I trust people that embrace book learning.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that this is something that is very likely, and the roadmap is set from the COVID crisis, and I think the doors are already blown off the hinges when it comes to some of the other things that is going to allow something like this to happen. So yeah, them declaring a climate emergency is definitely the number one thing that I'm looking out for in 2021. Cameron, you are the director of government relations here at the Heartland Institute. You have you've put some work towards some of these national policy things as well, but your focus is definitely squarely on the 50 states, maybe 52 after Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico are admitted. But what are the topics? What are the policies that you've kind of got an ear on as priorities in the coming year?
Well, sadly, we have to deal with governors. Whether you're Republican or you're a Democrat governor, you have a taste for power in your mouth. And I don't think any of them are exempt.
What about Kristi Noem, Cameron?
I don't think there's a governor in America right now that's going to say, "Oh, I tried it, but I didn't inhale." They're not going to say that. As much as I like what DeSantis has been doing in Florida, I have an equal frustration and hatred for what Cuomo is doing in New York. So for us, we're going to be looking at all 50 states, what these governors have been up to, and trying to try to claw back, really, what they've been doing with their executive authority. We've been talking to legislators all over the country, and there's legislators in every state that want to return to a more equal and balanced power structure in their states. And that's right. Isaac, we've talked to legislators in Minnesota. In some cases, it's a legal issue. In other cases, it's a political issue.
So, yeah, I mean, it's just remarkable that at the beginning of all this, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and then we're sitting here 9 months later, and you're still talking about how we've got to take power back from these people. Like they've gotten the ring of power, and they love the feel of it. So
right. They got a little taste of it.
I mean, let's just assume that the best case scenario, and that the vaccines, get rolled out, and we reach herd immunity, and like the real fear of this like pandemic kind of goes away. Are you going to see like a natural, them just kind of releasing the reins and kind of going back to your standard government? You're shaking your head. Explain.
No. NFW. Excuse my language, but NFW. It's not going to happen. It's going to then be guns. It's going to be education. You're going to see states taking over school districts, I'm sure. You're going to see heavy-handed regulation on guns. Some of them have already tipped their hands that they want to do this, that the model is there.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a very interesting thing.
I worry, there's 22 trifectas where the governor and the state legislatures are controlled by the same party. But in those states where those trifectas may be blue, why wouldn't they try to basically shut down school choice, for that matter? Especially now, we've seen during this pandemic, parents have figured out and to how best to educate their children. And they realized not that they can do it as well as a teacher, but there's other models out there that work. I mean, that's a direct threat to the people that put Joe Biden into office and put Democrat governors into office and elect Democrat state legislators.
Well, that idea of them
declaring Pipers need to get paid.
Them declaring an emergency, a health care emergency, as you were kind of talking about before, on guns. You said some legislatures have already kind of tipped their hand, and maybe you're already thinking about this. Do you have any specific examples in mind? Because that's a really interesting topic.
Well, I have not seen the legislation, which isn't to say that it hasn't been proposed. But if we're talking health emergencies, it just takes some paper and a pen, right? I'm sorry, a pen and a phone.
Right.
That's all it takes. So you don't need to see legislation, but you've had here in Wisconsin, you've had legislators from urban communities openly talk about guns being a public health crisis.
Wow.
The lieutenant governor in Wisconsin has said it.
That's very interesting. We definitely have to keep an eye on that. Isaac, you work primarily in Minnesota. Are there any specific policy topics that you're keeping an extra close eye on this year?
Yeah. So our governor wants to impose California car mandates on us that would require low emission vehicles and electric cars. So that's also being, proposed under the guise of public health and climate change protection. Yeah, I mean, it just gets worse every year. We're on our way to Illinois. We're just no professional football team. And,
oh my gosh!
On your way to Illinois, don't pass go.
Okay, go broke faster.
Don't just stay out of Wisconsin. Don't drag us into that mess.
I know.
Jim,
I'm a native, Cameron. I'll always have a specialer place in my heart for Wisconsin than anywhere else I live.
Jim, you obviously you've got a kind of a higher up altitude look on the actions of the Heartland Institute and kind of their primary focus. But I know that you're in these managing editors meetings and all of that stuff. Are there any topics that we should be keeping an eye on in this upcoming year?
Well, as we talked about before, I've been looking at the climate, the climate policies of the potential climate policies of the Biden administration, and it's going to be radical. It's going to establish rules that will try to reverse the loosening of regulations that was the hallmark of the Trump administration. Trump had a lot of victories that for deregulation and sensible regulations on the environment that were not implemented by George W. Bush, that were certainly made worse by Barack Obama. And Trump made some real progress on that, mentioning the opening up of the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge for oil drilling. The fracking for natural gas even went higher under Trump. All of that stuff is going to be turned back. I think what's going to be interesting is to see what challenges there will be to these basically executive orders and rule changes without proper so-called procedure. Every time Donald Trump tried to exercise the executive power that was non-controversial during the Obama years, he was met with a challenge in court to put a stop to him. I hope and expect that the things that Biden is going to try to do on the climate, especially if he declares a climate emergency, is going to be challenged in court. The hope, I would think, is that one of the big victories that Donald Trump did have, and really one of his great legacies, will be he appointed more conservatives to the federal bench, not just Supreme Court, but to the federal courts all across the country, than any of his predecessors. And he did it all in 4 years. That it will be interesting to see if these court challenges to these radical environmental policies are made, what courts they end up in, and how the courts will rule. One of the advantages that the environmental left has always had is that when they came up against a Republican administration, or even heck, they sued the Obama administration often. They would sue to get the policy they wanted. Then they would go court shopping, and then the judge would rubber stamp it, and then boom, they win. They didn't have to pass regulation. They didn't have to persuade a Environmental Protection Agency administrator to consider this proposal. They would just sue to get it. And so we're going to see how the courts are going to be used and how they're going to interplay with the new regulatory regime on the climate that's going to be coming out of the Biden administration.
Jim, that's interesting you say that, because I made the quip yesterday that on January 21st, Joe Biden's going to be president. And I think that's a reasonable trade-off for Amy Coney Barrett and a substantial conservative majority on SCOTUS.
For now.
That's a good trade-off.
Yeah, well, let's see if the court packing thing rears its ugly head again. All right, prediction time. How much stimulus money is going to be given to individual in the year 2021?
All stimmy all the time.
We'll count the $600 as 2021. How much more is going to be given out throughout the year? And I say this because there's already plans on an additional. Is it an additional 2,000 or is it just like 1,400 more?
Monday it was additional 1,400. Yesterday morning it's now probably another 2,000.
And by the time this podcast airs, it's going to be 2,500. And then I also say this because of that, right? And there was a recent story about Joe Biden talking about how he sees this latest 2,000 plan as a down payment on further stimulus help, throughout the year or something like that. So, genuine question. I'm going to write these down. How much money is going to be given in COVID stimulus money over the course of the year to an individual?
Does the winner get your stimulus money?
Yeah. Yeah.
No way. That's my money. Jim, start with you.
It's money. That's your son's money, Donnie.
$5,000 is my prediction. Although we don't need this, if they just open up the economy and stop treating us, like prisoners in our own homes and businesses and states,
that's not going to happen.
We wouldn't need the stimulus. The 5,000.
That's not going to happen.
And we're dealing in your so name your figure.
Isaac.
I was going to say 5,000, but I'm going to go 6 now.
Oh my gosh, higher. Okay.
It's like Price is Right. Say 5,001.
I thought about that, but I didn't want to do that.
I was going to say 6,001. Gosh.
Oh my gosh, you guys are all going higher. 6,001.
It can't go lower.
I think this is going to start to look like the tax code, actually. It's going to be graduated. It's going to be progressive. And you're going to see some folks getting $2,000 a month, where I think, the folks here who are good, hardworking folks, I think we might get a bag of peanuts every other Friday.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm going to take the under on all.
But then there'll be a separate huge bailout for all the ultra wealthy, and it'll be great because we in the middle will get crushed under the weight of our own peanut shells.
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, and without getting too wonky, I wouldn't be surprised to see that bracket of Americans that pay no federal income tax, that bracket of Americans, I bet you will see $1,000 a month in freedom payments, like Andrew Yang proposed.
Yeah,
surprise me.
Well, Isaac, after we're all crushed by the weight of all of this, I'll meet you at the Capitol building. So that's where we'll rendezvous at.
What is that supposed to imply, Donald?
That we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. All right, folks. Folks, any last words? Anything you want to get off your chest? Any funny stories? Actually, I'll say one thing. There is a story going around that the Daily Wire, which is Ben Shapiro's organization, they acquired the distribution rights
to Justin's sex tape
of a movie called Run, Hide, Fight. It's like a well-produced movie. They've got a trailer out and everything. And I think they're going to release it on their website at some point. And, but it's like, as far as I'm aware, it's like the first foray from like a policy first, political first commentary type website and organization getting into like entertainment, like Hollywood style entertainment. So it's a really interesting concept. I'm trying to reach out to people at the Daily Wire. I'm in contact with somebody. Hopefully I'm going to have somebody on next week to talk about that, but I think it's a really interesting thing. And I wonder if it's going to be like a wave of the future thing. And this kind of ties into, Jim, the topics that we were discussing last episode. with Hollywood and their wokeness. I wonder if this is going to be like the first step towards maybe our side of the aisle acquiring some of these, developing movies ventures.
Well, it was Andrew Breitbart, for whom we named the Andrew Breitbart Freedom Center here at the Heartland Institute, who said that politics is downstream from culture. One of the reasons we are where we are today is because of the culture that we have allowed basically to be dominated by the left for the last 30 years. So this is a good sign.
Yeah.
Our side tried to make a drama/action movie about the Kilo decision. So I think there needs to be some evolution in what our side calls entertainment.
Well, you check out the trailer of this. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes, but it looks pretty sick. The movie looks pretty good. Pretty good. All right, folks.
My thing that I said was way more interesting than that movie.
Oh no, God, no! Forget Isaac. Thank you everyone for tuning into this episode of the Tank Podcast. Join us every Friday for a new episode. If you like our show, please subscribe, rate, a review for us on iTunes. It'd be greatly appreciated. You can find us on Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, or even, I'm sure, pretty much everything nowadays. If you'd like, you could follow us on Socialist Twitter at In the Tank Pod. If you have any comments, suggestions, questions, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim, where can
mail to Justin at that address as well?
That's true. Jim, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always go to heartland.org.
Isaac Orr, same question.
You can find me at americanexperiment.org and at the Fracking Guy on Twitter.
Cameron, where can the fine people find you?
Just send it to Jim.
Just send it to Jim. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next.